Yeah, have it. Some wonderful responses this afternoon on that. I just want to kick off with this. Finally, this one. An opinion piece and stuff written by Jackie Clark from the Aunties caught our attention, titled, "You Can't Budget Your Way Out of Poverty." And Jackie writes that, look, it's expensive to live in poverty. If you pay bills late, you get a penalty. Paying $5 for data that barely lasts a day because you can't afford the $20 a month top up. You don't have enough each week to bulk buy, so you buy the bare minimum in food, which is more expensive. And that leads to constant anxiety, constantly thinking about payday and how to stretch out what you have until then. And Jackie says the woman that she works with often have 2 cans of baked beans in the pantry until payday, and they're being told to budget from people who have never had to survive on baked beans for a whole week. And I wanted to bring this up, Joe, because I thought to myself, imagine the anxiety of having, $5 in your pocket, having to last you for a few days, not knowing where that next meal is going to come from. That is the definition of worry and anxiety.
It is, and I think Jackie Clark makes the point really well that so quickly becomes an unbreakable cycle that you cannot get out of, because you just do not have enough money to keep your head above water. And I think that is not the society I want to live in, basically. I think people should be able to live a life, have a safe home, have food for their children. I think people who are working full-time, sometimes working more than one job, and still just in this absolutely unbreakable cycle of poverty.
The large message there was, look, you go to WINZ to get a food grant, guy, and you might get food grant upon food grant, and then a bit of an extra allowance, but that doesn't fix the real issue. We can't make our bills week by week. We just can't afford to survive.
Every time I get some sort of penalty or get stung or a parking fine or something like that, I always think obviously I'm frustrated, I'm always furious, that's the first reaction, but then I'm like so grateful that I can pay it without any sort of fear of having Bay Corp come and get me here or anything like that. And it is a real privilege, and every time that sort of thing happens, you've got to think, well, just how lucky am I that I can take this hit and keep on going, because some people can't.
How do you help then? I mean, even if we change the way we think about it, Joe, and talk about it, does it come down to one thing? Then we need more resources around this. We need to, what do some say, lift those benefit levels back up to how they were in the early 90s?
Well, I think
is that one option?
Benefits have not risen in line with the costs of living, absolutely not, and particularly around housing. I think if you are on a low fixed income, the percentage of your income that is going to your housing costs is unsustainably high, and I think that absolutely traps people in a cycle of poverty. I also think perhaps there's some systemic problems within WINZ. It seems it is not a system of compassion to give people the help and support they need, but a system that is dehumanising. And I think that once people absolutely feel that there is no hope for them or no way forward, they become disenfranchised from the society that we're all living in and all sharing.
And it's a cycle?
And I think it's more than a cycle. It's an ocean that people just drown in.
Ending on a serious note this afternoon, but lots of laughs and some great topics to be had, and some wonderful responses from none other than Guy Williams this afternoon. And Joe McCarroll, thank you very much for being with me today.
Cheers.
Checkpoint next. I'm back tomorrow at 3:45. Thank you to Ali for putting the show together.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere nei, when is an apology not an apology? 250 years on, and the UK High Commissioner issues a statement of regret to the descendants of those killed by Captain Cook. Measles jumps in Otago Southland, so is there enough vaccine to go around? Kiwi boxer Joseph Parker is taken down by a spider, and hundreds of university staff sign an open letter declaring racism and white supremacy has no place at Auckland University. The psychic surgeon who's under fire over her so-called healing shows speaks out. And what's behind the alarming rates of hearing loss among 13 and 14-year-olds? We'll also be live on the red carpet at the Silver Scrolls. RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. The British High Commissioner has acknowledged the pain and hurt the crew of the Endeavour caused to two Gisborne iwi during their first encounter with explorer James Cook. In two separate ceremonies, Laura Clark has made expressions of regret to both the Ngati Oneone Hapu and the Rongo Whakaata iwi, whose ancestors were killed by the crew of the Endeavour within hours of their arrival 250 years ago. Anusha Bradley is in Gisborne and filed this report.
Laura Clark and Ngati Oneone elder Charlotte Gibson were both brought to tears as they hugged and held each other in an emotional ceremony on Kaiti Hill. Moments before, Mrs Clark had expressed regret for the pain the Endeavour crew had caused after they killed their ancestor Te Maro. She spoke underneath a statue dedicated to Te Maro, saying she understood the pain had not diminished with time, but hoped they could forge a future relationship together. Mrs Clark then travelled to Whakato Marae to issue a similar statement of regret to Rongo Whakaata iwi, which media were not allowed to attend. I Tūranganui Kiwa, ko Anusha Bradley aho.
The engineer whose firm designed Christchurch's CTV building has lost an appeal of a High Court decision, clearing the way for a disciplinary investigation. The building collapsed during the 2011 Christchurch earthquake, killing 115 people. Its designer, Alan Ray, appealed the decision that allowed his professional body, the Institution of Professional Engineers, to investigate his supervision of the building's design. The institution, now known as Engineering NZ, previously dropped the investigation into Dr. Ray because he resigned from the body. The High Court last year said it was wrong to drop the investigation. In the Court of Appeal judgment today, Justice Forrie Miller says despite Dr. Ray's resignation from Engineering NZ, its rules say nothing about post-retirement liability for conduct during membership. The sister of a man who was poisoned by a woman known as the Black Widow wants an end to legal wrangles. Helen Milner was jailed for life for poisoning her husband Philip Nisbet in 2009 in order to receive a $250,000 life insurance payout. Mr Nisbet's death was initially treated as a suicide, but the case was reopened after an investigation by his sister, Leanne Cartier, and an inquest. Milner wants to get body samples released and sent to Australia for testing, but the Court of Appeal may yet decide that the decision must be made by the High Court. Outside the Court of Appeal this afternoon, Leanne Cartier was frustrated and upset.
Really stressed, thinking that a decision's not going to be made, that it could go to the High Court, and it just seems like everyone's juggling the ball, just throwing it from one to another, and when is this going to end, you know?
Leanne Cartier. A former High Court judge has been appointed by the University of Canterbury to investigate the death of a student at a residential hall. A New Zealand man was dead for a number of weeks before being found at the Sonodar village in Ilam, Christchurch last week. The University of Canterbury Council head, Sue McCormack, says Kit Toogood QC will lead an independent investigation into why it took so long to discover the man's body. She says the investigation will determine if student welfare policies at Sonodar village were adhered to and whether they need to be reviewed. Ms McCormack says a confidential email account will be set up so anyone with information can contact Mr Toogood personally. The investigation is expected to take 6 weeks. The Chief Human Rights Commissioner says white supremacist propaganda at Auckland University isn't unlawful, but the relevant legislation allowing them should be looked at. Posters and stickers promoting a recently launched white nationalist group have been seen at the university this week. Paul Hunt says the propaganda is pathetic and nonsense, but not unlawful. But he says there's some anomalies with the laws protecting them.
So there's one threshold for print media. It's a different threshold for online media. There's a set of protected groups under the print media, but there's a different set of protected groups under the online media. So there are some anomalies, and I think they should be looked at.
The Chief Human Rights Commissioner, Paul Hunt. A crane has fallen off a wharf in Lower Hutt. The 20-tonne crane, operated by a civil contracting company, toppled off the Centreport Seaview wharf about midday today. A spokesperson says the driver of the crane is not hurt and an investigation is underway. The harbour master and WorkSafe have been told. The crane fell into 12 metres of water and will be fished out. A man has been fined and barred from owning an animal for 5 years after failing to put his dying dog out of its misery. Michael Morehu has been sentenced in the District Court in the Hutt Valley today. He said he couldn't afford to euthanise his husky cross Zeus, who suffered from cancerous lesions on his face, nose and mouth. SPCA Chief Executive Andrea Midgen says Mr Morehu knew in 2016 that his dog should be put to sleep.
He understood that the dog was dying and in pain. It's so sad because I think, he didn't want to lose his lifelong friend and was probably thinking more about his own requirements rather than the dog's.
Andrea Midgen says it's unfathomable that Morehu let Zeus live so long in so much pain. It's coming up to 6 minutes past 5. A spider bite is believed to have derailed New Zealand boxer Joseph Parker's heavyweight bout against Derek Chisora in London later this week. Illness has forced the former WBO heavyweight and world champion to pull out of his October 27th fight, with doctors telling him to take 3 weeks rest. Parker's manager David Higgins says tests have shown Parker has blood poisoning.
The theory is it could be a spider bite, and he did sort of have what appeared to be a bite on his thigh. Could have been a whitetail or whatever. That's not conclusive, but that's certainly a possibility.
David Higgins. The All Blacks assistant coach Ian Foster says they won't be hiding anything or holding anything back against Canada in tonight's World Cup pool match, despite predictions the world champions will win by 100 points. Foster says they treat all opponents with respect and believe it's one of the reasons the All Blacks have such a good record against the Tier 2 teams.
You've got to respect every opposition you play. I'm pretty sure they'll be pretty excited about having a crack at us. And if we give them too many free shots, then we're going to be in for a hard afternoon or a hard evening like everyone is. So there's also a couple of things that we really need to improve and sharpen up for what's yet to come.
Ian Foster. Tonight's match kicks off at 11:15. The National Rugby League's Dally M Awards are tonight, with Warriors captain Roger Tuivasa-Sheck in the running to win the Player of the Year award for the second straight season. Tuivasa-Sheck is a finalist for the Fullback of the Year award, but the Roosters' James Tedesco is the favourite to win the position prize and the overall Supreme Award. That's the news.
An expression of regret.
The grief that they have been carrying for 250 years, and it's never been acknowledged or expressions of regret from the Crown.
Tackling white supremacy.
If we tolerate any form of white supremacy, we're fostering the kind of society that enables those more extreme expressions.
A ruined vintage.
Hail we don't normally get, but boy, this was a doozy. The clouds were black as anything and roiling across the sky. It was quite impressive.
Hard-hitting morning report weekdays from 6 a.m. on 101 FM, on air and online.
Then on 9 to noon, what a theatre piece can teach us about the 60,000 people living with dementia in New Zealand today. And after 10, former investigative journalist Shiv Malik on fighting for press freedom and being conned by a fraudster claiming to be an Islamic terrorist. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel Peninsula. Showers frequent for a time tonight, with thunderstorms and hail possible south of Waikato. Southwesterlies, gale in exposed places for a time this evening. For the remainder of the North Island, showers spreading northwards tonight with isolated thunderstorms and hail. Snow lowering to 700 metres, becoming fine tonight and tomorrow. Southwesterly gales in exposed places until later this evening. For Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, a period of rain and possible thunderstorms tonight with snow to 600 metres. Fine tomorrow with morning frosts, apart from morning showers about Banks Peninsula. For Bulla and Westland, remaining showers north of Hokitika, clearing, then fine everywhere. Morning frosts tomorrow. Fiordland, Otago and Southland, occasional showers clearing about central and north Otago. Chatham Islands, fine tonight, showers tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 5:09. Thank you, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Descendants of the people killed at James Cook's first encounter were brought to tears as the British High Commissioner delivered her statement of regret to the hapu. History was made today as Laura Clark delivered the message to iwi and Turanganui-a-Kiwa for the atrocities committed during the first contact with Māori 250 years ago. Anusha Bradley was there.
At the outlook of Ruatanuika on Titirangi Maunga, the British High Commissioner was called to deliver her statement to the hapu of Ngāti Oneone. It is where a statue stands of their ancestor, Te Maro. He was the first killed during James Cook's encounter with Māori in 1769. Laura Clark expressed her sympathy and regret for what happened.
It is deeply sad that the first encounter happened in the way that it did. And to you, as the descendants of those killed, I offer my every sympathy. For I understand that the pain does not diminish with time.
She told Hapu that although she's not a representative of the Queen, she is of her government and the countries it represents. And she hopes today marks a new relationship with Ngāti Oneone.
I would like today to acknowledge the pain and to reach out to you in friendship and in the hope that in acknowledging the past, we can forge a future relationship together. A relationship that pays homage to Aotearoa as your home, recognises the mana that is yours by birthright to this land, and builds a future together for the prosperity of all.
A Ngāti Oneone spokesperson, Nick Tupara, says the site where the High Commissioner spoke is significant. It is where Te Maro would study the moon and the stars, and his statue overlooks what was formerly his gardens. Mr. Tupara is hopeful today's speech is a sign of things to come.
A statement of regret suggests that there's an opening for some dialogue going forward. It suggests a possibility of a relationship, working together and growing together, helping each other out. And so I'm very optimistic that the statement of regret is a far more poignant opportunity for Ngāti Oneone.
The British High Commission decided to make the statement after a call from Turanganui-a-Kiwa iwi for an apology. Nick Tupara says Laura Clark was bold in staying at the table to make it happen.
I'm certainly really heartened by her tenacity and her effort and just her passion to do something like that. Her day could have been a lot easier if she just well, okay, I'm going to step away from the table now, but she chose to sit there and continue on with the conversation.
Nick Tupara says although it's a historic day, he still feels Pōuri as he reflects on what his ancestors faced.
It's tinged with a little sadness. I grew up in a cook town, and in this town all of our ancestral stories were kept here at the marae, and you very seldom, if ever, had an opportunity to talk about those others who stood on the beach that day in 1769.
Meanwhile, the Minister for Crown Māori Relations, Calvin Davis, has acknowledged the significance of what's happened today, but says it's a matter for the British High Commission and iwi. Mr Davis says there were very early discussions about the New Zealand government also playing a role, but it was decided that was not appropriate.
We've said this is not it's nothing to do with us. The Crown didn't exist at the time. This is entirely an issue between the High Commission and the Tūranga iwi, and what the High Commission has to say to Tūranga iwi is entirely up to them.
The High Commissioner delivered 2 messages of regret. From the Outlook at Titirangi, she then went to Whakatoa Marae, just outside of Gisborne, to speak to iwi members from Rongo Whakaata, Te Aitanga a Mahaki and Nai Tā Manuhiri. Kei te Turanganui-a-Kiwa mo te hōtaka o te ahi-ahi, ko Anusha Bradley, aho.
It's almost 5:15 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let us know what you think about that statement of regret from the British High Commissioner. Does it go far enough? Good start? Let us know your thoughts. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. There's been a spike in measles cases in Otago, Southland, but the DHB says it needs to prioritise the vaccine. In the past 48 hours, 13 new measles cases have been confirmed in Queenstown, 2 in Wanaka and 1 in Dunedin. The Southern DHB says people who had the measles and were infectious at the time visited many Queenstown restaurants, ski fields, parks and shops over the last few weeks. I asked the Southern DHB's Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Susan Jack, for the latest.
As of this afternoon, we've now got 57 cases. Most of these are in the Queenstown area, so 52 of them, but we've got 2 in Wanaka, 2 in Dunedin and 1 in Oamaru.
So why this sudden uptick in cases, do you think?
I think we've had measles circulating in Queenstown and it's jumped into community transmission and, every 10 to 14 days you're going to get the contacts of the previous person who had measles, so we're just part of that pathway.
Do you think this has come in with travellers?
Most of our confirmed cases are living in Queenstown. We've had a couple of travellers, but most of them, it seems to be, have come from circulating in Queenstown.
Can you tell us, of the cases that you've got, are these people unvaccinated? Are they part of the immunity gap, or what is the situation?
So some of them are unvaccinated, but we do have some that have had at least one vaccine and a few that have actually been fully vaccinated. So it is a mixture, but a large proportion have been uncertain about their vaccination status.
So how many cases do you have where people have been fully vaccinated?
Just a few. I haven't got the exact numbers on hand, sorry.
Obviously, in people in isolation, have you got some people who have been asked to stay at home?
Yes, and that's one of our big ways that we can help control this outbreak is by, if we have contacted people and asked them to be isolated, to do that very strictly. We have isolated some and then they have developed measles. And the great thing is that they haven't been out in the community while they're infectious because they've been isolated. So we've been able to contain it in that way. But now we're seeing an upsurge in our cases. And so if we ask you to be isolated, we do ask people to adhere to that.
So how many people have you asked to stay put?
We're probably, 150, 180 or so. Over the course of the last couple of months.
Yeah, because it's the school holidays right now, so I'm wondering, does that make it harder or easier?
Yeah, it depends on your family. Obviously, it is restrictive if we ask people to be isolated, but we're doing it in order to protect our most vulnerable in our communities, those people who can't be vaccinated, so pregnant women, people with cancer who may be immunocompromised, and young babies who are not even of the age to be vaccinated. So we're doing it so that we can contain the spread in our communities.
So what is the situation in terms of vaccines? How many vaccines have you got in your district?
So we've got adequate vaccine to do all our routine vaccination for children at 15 months and 4 years, and enough for if any children are late in getting those, we have adequate vaccine, and then we're working with the ministry to try and get extra vaccine done into our area.
So if an adult comes in to be vaccinated, will they get a vaccination?
Right now, they're not one of our priority groups, but we're working on that.
So when you say you've got enough for kids, in essence, how many vaccinations do you have? How many children can you vaccinate?
So we've worked with primary care, and I can't give you the exact numbers again, but we have got enough vaccine for anybody who's eligible for that under 5 age group.
Right, but in essence, you're rationing them, aren't you?
We're prioritising that group who should be having their routine vaccinations, yes.
So you've put out a list, I see, of venues, obviously, where people who have contracted the measles have been. If you are exposed or have been exposed, what's your status in terms of getting a vaccination, and would it do you any good?
Well, what we're asking people, if they think they've been to any of those areas at those times, to go home and check their vaccination records. If they've had 2 measles-containing vaccines, so 2 MMRs, then they're absolutely fine. If they're unvaccinated, then they should be looking out for signs and symptoms and isolate themselves if they become symptomatic.
But would they get vaccinated?
If they have not... If they're completely unvaccinated or not fully vaccinated, at the moment we don't have enough vaccine for them.
Even if they've been in one of these areas, cafes, pool, gym, that you've listed here, they still wouldn't be a priority for a vaccination?
In the big scheme of things, yes, they're a priority, but right now we don't have enough vaccine, so we're needing to prioritise to our most vulnerable people who are our young children.
And what kind of timeline have you been given in terms of getting access to more vaccines?
We're hoping that in the next few weeks we'll have access to more vaccine.
So, within a fortnight or longer?
We haven't been given the exact dates, I'm sorry.
Have they got problems with supply?
The Ministry are working hard to get adequate supplies into New Zealand.
But what have they told you about access to extra vaccines? What's the message you're getting?
They are working as hard as they can on that, so we're very hopeful that we'll be getting extra vaccine.
And that's Dr. Susan Jack, who's the Medical Officer of Health at the Southern DHB. Hundreds of university staff have signed an open letter declaring racism and white supremacy have no place at the University of Auckland. A new wave of posters and stickers promoting a recently launched white nationalist group have been spotted at the university this week. The Chief Human Rights Commissioner says while the propaganda isn't unlawful, it does beg questions around whether New Zealand's current hate speech laws are fit for purpose. Katie Scotcher reports.
Earlier this week, posters and stickers promoting a recently launched white supremacist group appeared at the University of Auckland. And this isn't the first time. In April, RNZ reported students were becoming increasingly afraid of what they described as a growing movement on campus and white supremacist propaganda being plastered on campus walls. The group responsible for the latest campaign recruits young white men, and its stated aim is to protect European culture. A spokesperson for the university describes the group's views as abhorrent, but says they are protected by freedom of speech. But now hundreds of university staff members, including senior academics, have hit back. In an open letter, staff say racism and white supremacy have no place on campus. They say they have no trouble identifying the group's beliefs as white supremacy, and its ambitions are clearly at odds with Te Tiriti o Waitangi. One of those staff members, Kate Hanna, says now is a critical time for the university.
I think that perhaps it's time for us as a community at the university to have a conversation with experts, people from law, from political science, from history, from all those disciplines that inform the ways in which we have come to understand free speech. And to have a conversation about what that really means and what the limitations of free speech are.
She says the latest campaign has a louder message than others in the past.
One of the things about the most recent occurrences this week on campus is that they were very blatant. They weren't highly symbolic, which we have had in other white supremacist or alt-right or neo-Nazi presences on campus in the past. That's why I'm really hoping that this will lead to a moment in which those experts from the disciplines I listed before can be involved in having a conversation about understanding what this now looks like in the 21st century.
Chief Human Rights Commissioner Paul Hunt says the group's posters are pathetic nonsense, but not unlawful. He says there are some anomalies within the law protecting them.
So there's one threshold for print media. It's a different threshold for online media. There's a set of protected groups under the print media, but there's a different set of protected groups under the online media. So there are some anomalies, and I think they should be looked at.
He says people need to ask whether the country's current hate speech laws are fit for purpose.
When we ask that question, the debate must be inclusive. It must allow all communities to express their view, and the discussion must be respectful and it must be well informed.
In a statement, Acting Vice-Chancellor John Morrow said universities were established to be society's critic and conscience. He said the open letter showed staff exercising their right to academic freedom and was a welcome contribution to ongoing debate on matters that are central to the university's values. I tamaki makouro mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Katie Scott Churaho.
After a tortuous 10-day wait between games, it's finally the day for the All Blacks' second pool match at the Rugby World Cup, with New Zealanders taking on Canada in Oita. Fans of both teams have flocked into the area overnight and into the neighbouring city of Beppu. Rugby reporter Joe Porter took to the streets this morning to gauge the feeling among supporters ahead of the match.
Less than 80-point win by the ABs tonight. I think going to get a lot of ball movement, I think, and get the combinations really going for that next game, and looking forward to the quarters.
Certainly a few Kiwis around Beppu at the moment.
Oh, it's almost like being back home, to be fair. There's black jerseys everywhere, so it's been great. Yeah, fantastic.
I think Canada, we went and watched the USA-Canada game in Vancouver a few weeks ago, and there's definitely a lot to be desired there, but, you know, they're very passionate.
You're expecting it to be more Kiwis or more Canadians in the crowd tonight, do you think?
Definitely Kiwis, eh? We can't seem to get away from them. Yeah.
Cam, Simon and Regan part of the Kiwi invasion of Beppu and Oita, with All Blacks jerseys thick on the ground. But it's not just New Zealanders sporting AB's gear.
New Zealand to win.
Are you looking forward to seeing the haka?
Yeah. And this is the first time to see the haka.
The first time to see the All Blacks play?
Yes. Go All Blacks!
Hiroshi and Tomo are pumped for the game and their first All Blacks experience, but what about Canadian fans?
I think it's going to be entertaining for a time, and then it won't be as entertaining for some of the people.
Do you think Canada have a chance?
When you're ranked 22 out of 20 teams, maybe not.
So what do you hope to see from the Canadians then? Obviously a lot of heart and spirit and never lie down.
Some good defence. That's it.
Can we get a score prediction?
67-3.
I'm not giving one.
Mel and Johnny are not the only father and son on the trip of a lifetime. Kiwis Damon and Michael of Nai Tamanuhiri Muriwai are here for much more sombre reasons, fulfilling a dream for their father, Tawehi.
Recently, my dad over here got diagnosed with motor neurons, and there was a time frame with that, and he had a bucket list. So within 3 weeks, we had booked a hotel, flights, got some free tickets from, and we're here.
What are you expecting from tonight's game?
Well, we camped up with a few Canadians, so, and they're expecting a big score, but I said anything can happen.
They're going to get a hiding, the Canadians.
Hey, I really appreciate it, guys. I'm sorry to hear about your old man there. That sucks. I think it's a wonderful thing what you're doing for your father, and I hope you guys really have a great trip. While Damon was willing to give the Canadians a chance, their own fans aren't so sure, including Aussie Luke and Canadian Karen. What are you expecting?
A bloodbath.
I'm hoping Canada scores at least once, then I'll be happy. Yeah.
What are you hoping from the Canadians tonight?
Good energy. That's all we can bring. Yeah.
For Canadian supporter Tom and his son Henry, this will be their third World Cup. They were in Wellington when the All Blacks met the Maple Leafs in 2011. I believe Canada scored first that game.
We were in the lead. We were going to call in a bomb threat to cancel the game at that point.
And you're looking forward to seeing the All Blacks. Do you have a favourite player in the All Blacks team?
No, I'm mainly just here to watch some rugby, but miss 2 weeks of school.
Oh, Joe, we can go live now to Joe Porter in Beppu. So no shortage of Kiwis and Canadians then, I take it, Joe?
No, far too many, in fact. It almost looks like this town's been turned upside down and there's a complete invasion. Canadians and Kiwis everywhere you look, All Blacks jerseys, red Canadian jerseys, of course. And yeah, the locals almost look like they've been pushed out of town. There's barely a local on site at the moment. But yes, the Yakitori bars, the izakaya bars, the teppanyaki places, the restaurants are packed today. And there's just a whole bunch of All Blacks jerseys wandering around on the streets. It really is an atmosphere here, and it will be even bigger in Oita tonight. Kiwis and Canadians loving it so far here in Japan, of course, and no end of food options for them to enjoy before they go to the game this evening.
Hey, just before we talk more about rugby, for the people who are listening and not watching, whereabouts are you, Joe? You appear to be hanging out at one of those bars yourself.
Oh, there's so many in Beppu. It's such a wonderful small town. It's got a really nice compact CBD with pedestrian-only streets that you can walk around. And I'm in the sort of central district here where there's just many, many streets and bars that look exactly like this. This is one of many streets that have all these lovely lanterns and beautiful small izakaya and teppanyaki and, like I said, yakitori places to go to. It's just, it is a wonderful place. Walking around at night here is never boring, and it's a great wee city. I'm having an absolute time of my life off the field and out of work here. It's been a wonderful place, and I do recommend if anyone gets a chance to come to Beppu, make sure you do it, because it's a fantastic place with fantastic people and even better food.
Hey, so what are the expectations tonight? Someone there in your piece said it was going to be a bloodbath. Are the Canadian fans right to be so pessimistic?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the All Blacks will put 100 points on the Canadians. It could be interesting to see whether Mark Ellis's record of 6 tries in one match, of course scored against the Japanese in the 1995 World Cup, will be broken. Rieko Ioane comes back in for the All Blacks. He was the winger of the year, the world winger of the year, the best winger in the world last year. But he's been usurped by the likes of George Bridge and Sevu Reece, so a big game needed from him if he's to play a role in the knockout stages of this tournament. Can he break Mark Ellis's 6 tries in one match record? We'll soon find out. The All Blacks will want to see combinations develop further. They've picked Beauden Barrett at fullback and Richie Mo'unga at first 5 again, so they want to see that combination continue to develop. They want to see some other players that have been given a shot get some game time. It's an entirely different front row, a different midfield with Sonny Bill Williams and Jack Goodhue coming in. They need some game time under their belts, and of course they don't want anyone to get hurt. That's the major thing. They don't want any big injuries to any of their big players.
Nice to talk to you, Joe. That is Joe Porter, or Joe Sporter as we know him, joining us there from one of the streets in Beppu. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, a spider knocks out Joseph Parker. A study blames loud music playing through headphones and earbuds for hearing loss among our teens. And the Duchess of Sussex begins legal action against the British newspaper The Mail on Sunday. Well, there's a surprise. Hey, we'd love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program today. Are you having trouble getting measles vaccine? Let us know, especially if you're down south. We would love to hear from you. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. A little late, but let's get to the headlines with Susanna.
Emotional ceremonies have been held in Gisborne as the British High Commissioner acknowledged the pain and hurt the crew of the Endeavour caused to 2 Gisborne iwi during their first encounter with explorer James Cook 250 years ago. Laura Clark said she understands the pain has not diminished with time, but hopes a future relationship can be forged. The Educational Institute says it will try to include non-union early childhood teachers in its campaign for pay parity. The union is asking the staff to support its push for early education teachers to get the same pay as school teachers. Listening to loud music on mobile phones is causing high rates of hearing loss among teenagers. The National Foundation for Deaf and Hard of Hearing says testing of nearly 500 Year 9 students at 3 secondary schools has found a third had mild to severe hearing loss. The foundation says the incidence of hearing loss among young people is rising internationally, and the government should introduce screening tests for secondary school students. There have been fresh outbreaks of measles in various parts of the country. Queenstown's measles outbreak has spread to other areas of Otago, with 2 new cases in Wanaka and 1 in Dunedin. It brings the total number of cases in the Southern District Health Board to 50. Another case of the measles has also been confirmed in Taupo. An Upper Hutt man is disgusted that dozens of fish have died because the Greater Wellington Regional Council flushed heavy sediment from a dam into a creek. Residents came across dozens of dead trout that became smothered in mud in the creek below the Birchville Dam. An Australian teenager has been charged with animal cruelty after a pickup truck ran down 19 kangaroos. The marsupials were found dead or injured on a road south of Sydney. Police say it was a horrific scene. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Hey, do you listen to loud music through headphones on your phone?
Not really.
Well, I might be guilty of that. We'll have more on that later in the show. This is Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen, and Madison Reedy is joining me in the studio to talk business. Reserve Bank is worried about the future of cash, as in what, we're not going to use it anymore? It's just going to be cards and other means of paying?
Well, people are already going that way. I mean, I don't know if you own any cash, but when we were doing this story today, I opened my wallet and I had not one coin in sight, but my colleague had plenty. So you know who to go to if you ever need to buy coffee. But yeah, look, the Reserve Bank has been looking at this for a while now. And today it actually released a public consultation paper on this whole idea of the future of cash. Now, within this paper, it did say that the number of ATMs from the country's 5 largest banks has actually reduced 8% in the years from 2010 to 2017. Now, it also said that the Reserve Bank is just one cog in the big cash machine. The Reserve Bank, its job is obviously to print and distribute cash around the country, but there's also banks that are involved and also retailers who obviously accept cash and then give it back out as change, and also armoured trucks who are the ones that drive cash around the country too. Now, this consultation paper from the Reserve Bank, they concluded that there really is no steward of the cash system. So really no one is looking after it to ensure that there is a future of cash. Now, they say that they want a change to the Reserve Bank Act, which is the legislation that they operate under, to give it the power to ensure that cash does actually have a future. Now, they want to be able to force retail banks to be to have to allow people to withdraw and accept cash as well, so that if you or I ever want to get $20 out, then we can, that there should be an ATM nearby. They also mentioned, though, that there is actually no law forcing any seller of goods to accept cash, even though it is legal tender. They say that's a problem, but not their problem, so they're not asking for that one to be changed under their law. So basically, the Reserve Bank wants to control accessibility, but not acceptability, even though it does think that that's important. Now, the Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank, Christian Hawkesby, he says that while consumers are increasingly using digital payment solutions these days, there is still support for cash.
The feedback that we've had is that people are using, we know from data that people are using cash less as a form of payment, but people are actually continuing to hold cash and if anything are holding more cash than previously. And what we're finding is that there are still pockets of society that are still quite reliant on cash. Particularly those that are financially excluded, those that aren't digitally savvy, the very young, the very old. There's still many sort of cultural issues around using cash that means it continues to be used. So that's the feedback that we're getting about use of cash at the moment.
That's Christian Hawkesby from the Reserve Bank.
Okay, I want to know, Maddie, from people. They can get in touch, text us on 2101. I want to know if you still carry cash in your wallet and give us an idea of what age you are.
Do you still carry cash, Lisa?
Well, yeah, I feel naked if I don't have just a small amount of cash, because sometimes people don't take cash. So
I'm such a millennial, aren't I?
But I wouldn't carry large amounts of cash,
No,
but
just
use cards. But I always feel like I need a couple of coins on hand. Okay, let's move on to the survey of retailers who says shops are here to stay. Well, this is another bricks and mortar versus online, I suppose, is it?
Yeah, this story is pretty much in keeping with the previous one. So this was a survey conducted by Massey University. Now, they say that despite the rise in online shopping and online payments, bricks and mortar retail is not dying. In fact, retailers actually see physical stores as an increasingly important way to show off their brand to consumers. And they actually think that bricks and mortar retail stores are not just about sales anymore, but it's actually about the in-store experience that they're providing. Now, that actually does ring pretty true with the amount of international brands that we have seen launch in New Zealand recently. Makeup stores like Sephora, other ones that I frequent probably far too often are the clothing stores H&M and Zara, and also IKEA and Costco on their way as well. Also, the number of physical stores that are under development.
I'm smiling at you, Maddie, because you say it's like an experience. Some people would say that's an horror experience with massive queues and a heaving throng of people as you rustle through, stock. Anyway, do carry on.
Depends who you are, but I personally think, on a rainy day, what else better to do than, go and spend your hard-earned money. And so, as I was saying about these physical stores, we do have a number under development, big multi-billion-dollar developments too. Obviously, the one in Auckland's Newmarket being built by Westfield, and also Commercial Bay in downtown Auckland too. Hundreds of brands, particularly international brands, are lined up to launch flagship stores there too.
Interesting. Let's do a quick whip around the markets. What else has been going on?
The NZX Top 50 Index closed down 0.4% tonight, so that's a fall of 45 points to close at 10,951. The New Zealand dollar, that's buying at 62.5 US cents, 93 to the Aussie and 50.9 British pence.
Thanks, Maddie. Madison Reedy with our business wrap. Let's go overseas now. A Hong Kong activist is in hospital after being shot in the chest by police during clashes on the 70th anniversary of communist rule in China. It's the first injury from a live round during nearly 4 months of protests. Thousands of people demonstrated last night in defiance of a protest ban. It was a day of chaos and violence on the streets, as the BBC's Gabriel Gatehouse reports.
Beijing wanted this to be a celebration of communist rule, but in Hong Kong, they took to the streets in protest. Not everyone was demonstrating, though, far from it. There are large numbers of people in this city who support Beijing. But those who wanted to watch the pomp and circumstance did so in muted fashion. This is a city divided, and where the balance lies is not clear. But there was no doubting which side filled the streets today. The authorities banned their march. The protesters ignored them. Much of public transport was closed. That didn't stop them either. For now, it was peaceful but defiant.
Well, they're trying to set light to a Chinese flag there, and it's hard to overemphasize how subversive that feels on the mainland on a day like this.
Over the past 3.5 months, the stakes have been steadily rising. In response to heavy-handed policing, some protesters have become increasingly confrontational. We met one of the so-called frontliners.
Now, if you see anyone looking in through the window, just duck down, yeah?
Radicals who guard their identities fiercely and now see no turning back.
If I get shot in the head and I die, it's okay.
Seriously?
Yes.
But you might die for nothing.
If I die because of the police guns, this may raise the awareness of the society. Because I can be the first protester that died from the guns, not suicide.
It sounds like you almost wish for such an outcome.
No, I'm not wishing that I die for this. But if it happens, I can't control it because it depends on the police.
We find ourselves at a junction in Kowloon where people are building barricades. Everyone is nervous. When a car doesn't stop at the roadblock, jumpy protesters lash out. Suddenly, things look like they could turn ugly. Just up the road, police are gathering. And then, some news filters through.
You heard the police had fired 2 shots. Yes, we heard the same. Did you see it yourself? No. You didn't see it? Okay. All right.
Not far away, we learnt, a policeman had shot a demonstrator with a pistol at point-blank range. By now, battle lines were drawn. Against volleys of tear gas, the protesters hurled bricks and petrol bombs. One of them gets hit with what looks like a rubber bullet. These were scenes repeated in at least half a dozen locations across the territory. Block by block, the police pushed the protesters back.
This is not a protest anymore. This is turning into urban warfare. The protesters are throwing Molotov cocktails. The police, they're about to charge.
In the end, bricks and umbrellas are no match for actual firepower. This was exactly what Beijing didn't want to see today. They wanted it over by now. But the young radical we spoke to earlier promised to fight on.
Today is important, but today is not the end game.
You think it will continue?
Yes. Until those 5 demands have been achieved, the most fundamental demand is universal suffrage.
Democracy.
Yes, democracy.
Events are escalating. Each protest ends in greater violence and more arrests. This used to be a city where Hong Kong and Chinese identities could sit alongside each other. Increasingly, people are being forced to pick a side.
The BBC's Gabriel Gatehouse there. A pilot study has found alarming rates of hearing loss among 13 and 14-year-olds with loud music on earbuds and headphones getting the blame. The National Foundation for Deaf and Hard of Hearing tested the hearing of nearly 500 Year 9 students at 3 secondary schools. It says 1 in 3 of the students had an abnormal result, meaning they have mild to severe hearing loss. Here's our education correspondent, John Gerritsen.
These young people admit they use their earbuds or headphones a lot, but they also believe they're not listening loud enough to hurt their hearing.
Well, I don't listen to them that loud, and whenever I listen to it at school, all my friends tell me, put it up louder, put it up louder. I just say, no, I need to put them down low because they actually do hurt my ears.
Yeah. I don't listen to loud music necessarily, but I do use headphones quite a lot, yes.
Well, it depends on what type of music it is. If it's something crazy, and I do it low, but when it's like something quiet, I do it loud.
But the chief executive of the National Foundation for Deaf and Hard of Hearing, Natasha Gallardo, says its testing has found many young New Zealanders are listening to music on earbuds and headphones too loud and for too long.
At one particular school, Manurewa, there were around 68 of the kids that were listening to maximum volume, and around 34% of them were listening to maximum volume for more than 3 hours a day, which is way beyond your safe sound allocation. And there was a correlation there too with those kids that were listening to maximum volume. 37% of them came back with an abnormal screening result.
Natasha Gallardo says international studies show the incidence of hearing problems in young people has risen 30% since the 1990s, with 1 in 5 suffering some form of hearing loss. She says New Zealand needs more information about the scale of the problem here, and her organisation will lobby the government for mandatory screening in secondary schools.
We need to be mindful of making sure that we're detecting this early. At the moment, in the next 3 decades, we will see hearing loss double. So it's already a very large disability happening right now. So early detection is key, and so we can make sure that they can live as normal life as possible.
Libby Gibbons from the Audiological Society says the results are surprising, and it's backing the Foundation's call for testing secondary school students. She says some phones can play sound at more than 100 decibels, louder than a lawnmower, and the louder a sound, the less time you should be exposed to it.
It's an exponential risk. Once you're getting over like 80 decibels very quickly, it becomes that you can only be exposed for minutes before there's a high risk of damage occurring.
Richard Dykes from the Auckland Secondary Principals Association says testing's a good idea because it's not easy for teachers to spot that a student has a hearing problem.
We're all very adept at, hiding those kind of losses. Like, a student could just sit near the front. Well, is that because of their hearing loss, or is that just because they want to sit at the front of the class? So, no, it's not something that we pick up as a matter of fact. If it did pop up through the nurse or through some other procedures, we'd definitely try and support the student and their parents, but fundamentally, no, there's no mechanisms in place.
The National Foundation for Deaf and Hard of Hearing is planning to continue its screening tests in more secondary schools. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
Let us know how you deal with that in your household. Do you limit the amount of time your children can use headphones? And how do you control the noise volume that they're setting their devices at? Text us on 2101, or you can tweet us at checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. A woman dubbed the Black Widow may have to go to the High Court to get body samples of her dead husband released for testing in Australia. Helen Milner is serving a 17-year sentence for poisoning Philip Nisbet with an anti-allergy drug in in 2009. Mr Nisbet's death was initially treated as a suicide, but the case was reopened in 2011 after an investigation by his sister, Leanne Cartier, and an inquest. Milner wants samples of Mr Nisbet's blood, urine, liver and hair to be released for testing in a last-ditch effort to overturn her conviction. However, at the Court of Appeal this afternoon, the Crown made a late submission that the proper jurisdiction to hear the case is the High Court. Outside court, Leanne Cartier told reporters she wants the whole thing to come to an end.
Just really stressed, thinking that a decision's not going to be made, that it could go to the High Court, and it just seems like everyone's juggling the balls, just throwing it from one to another, and when is this going to end, 10.5 years. It's just time to just stop it. It's just a futile mess, it can't go anywhere. It's just, we just want a decision, and we just want Phil's parts returned to us so we can lay them to rest.
Victim advocate Ruth Marnie supported the family in court today. She says the case is expensive and unnecessary.
This offender has exhausted all appeal that she had, gone from court to court to court, and this really is grasping at straws. And I think this, from a community perspective, we expect the Crown to represent the community and certainly these families, and they have not done that. And this is a slippery slope, because there are samples everywhere that now offenders can be trying to make a play to if this decision is not the right decision. And that, as an advocate, really, really concerns me.
Ruth Marnie. The 3 judges in the case have reserved their decision. It is about 10 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Kiwi boxer Joseph Parker has had to withdraw from his upcoming bout in London after picking up what's thought to be an illness caused by a spider bite. Currently in Las Vegas, where he prepares for all his fights, the former WBO heavyweight world champ was due to take on British contender Derek Chisora in London at the end of this month. But as Parker's manager David Higgins confirmed to Clay Wilson, that will no longer be happening.
Joseph was feeling very, very unwell. And the top physician in Vegas said that he had some form of blood poisoning or whatever and needs to stand down for 3 weeks and rest his body, which has basically taken him out of action for October 26.
It sounds like it all stemming from what you think is a spider bite, is that right?
Yeah, the theory is it could be a spider bite, and he did sort of have what appeared to be a bite on his thigh. Could have been a whitetail or whatever. I mean, that's not conclusive, but that's certainly a possibility.
And just how sick has he been?
Run down, like niggles, a lot of things that were warning signs, and then the medical evidence showed that there was indeed a problem.
So he hasn't been able to train and things like that, or he's been limited?
He's been training, but Joe's one of those guys that doesn't complain. So he wouldn't say anything if he was struggling a bit. That's one of the things that in boxing the stakes are so high, you don't want to risk a loss because of 2 or 3 weeks. So you've got to be careful, and so it was the right decision. I'm quite relaxed about it. Joseph's quite relaxed about it.
And just in terms of who the next opponent might be,
Joseph would like to fight Chisora, but if they replace Joseph with someone else, then it might end up being someone else. But Joseph's one of those guys that will fight whoever they put in front of him. So again, it's not that big a deal. It's just a matter of getting him well again and then getting back on a card.
That's Joseph Parker's manager David Higgins there speaking to Clay Wilson after it was confirmed that a suspected spider bite has left the Kiwi boxer unwell and unable to fight in London at the end of this month. To the United States now, and the political storm over the phone call between the President and Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison over Donald Trump's request for help to discredit the Mueller inquiry into Russian meddling. The President's allies have defended the conversation as routine and entirely proper, and they've cited a letter released by Australia's Ambassador Joe Hockey, who offered to help. They say the White House was merely following up on that offer. The ABC's Connor Duffy has this report.
Good evening, I'm Katie Turner. To the New York Times, President Trump pushed the Australian Prime Minister, Scott Morrison.
CNN has learned that President Trump also leaned on Australia's Prime Minister to help with the Justice Department probe into the origins of the Mueller
It's rare for Australia to be at the centre of a US political dispute, but in the nervy early rounds of an impeachment fight, that's where Canberra has found itself. US Attorney General William Barr is investigating the origins of the Mueller report, including allegations law enforcement illegally spied on the Trump campaign in 2016. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham spent the weekend golfing with the president and defended the requests made of foreign leaders, including Prime Minister Scott Morrison.
It's clear to me that Liberals are starting an attack against Barr to shut him down from going to Italy, Australia and the UK to find out if there was something wrong regarding opening up the investigation of the Trump campaign to begin with. If that's not a double standard, I don't know what would be. These countries should be cooperating with Barr.
The White House has also seized on the release of a letter from Ambassador Joe Hockey showing Australia offered to help with the inquiry back in May. President Trump's 2020 campaign National Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany blamed a familiar target, the New York Times, accusing it of exaggerating the tone of the phone call.
What the public wants is answers. And that New York Times story that you report on, 22 paragraphs down, they have this salacious headline about Trump pressuring Australia, which wasn't the case, was an offer to help from Australia. But 22 paragraphs down in that New York Times story, they say there is nothing untoward.
Democrats so far aren't using the call in their impeachment campaign. President Obama's former senior strategist Roger Fisk believes the Ukraine call will remain their focus.
For the Democrats, tactically, in terms of communications, we can always just go back to the fact that the president was dangling hundreds of millions of dollars of aid over a struggling country that's dealing with Russian aggression and was basically saying, you do this, and then maybe we'll open the floodgates and the aid will flow your way. It's a pretty simple narrative.
He says Democrats who are back home in their districts on a congressional break will be building their case around that phone call, alleging the president's request for a favour coming after Ukraine raised military aid was a clear quid pro quo.
If I'm holding back a couple $100 million from you, for example, and in the course of our conversation I say, hey, you know, it'd be great if someone cut my lawn or something, I don't have to say, if you cut my lawn, I'll give you the $200 million. When that amount of money is dangling over a conversation, you don't have to be that overt.
Canberra will be relieved not to have a leading role in the upcoming pitched warfare of impeachment.
Connor Duffy reporting there. The Duchess of Sussex has begun legal action against the British newspaper The Mail on Sunday. The action is over a claim that it unlawfully published one of her private letters. In a statement, Prince Harry referred to what he called relentless propaganda against his wife and said he wasn't prepared to see her victimised by the press as his mother was. The couple are on the last leg of their tour of southern Africa. And the BBC's Nicholas Witchell reports from Johannesburg.
It is remarkably outspoken. It is nothing less than a stinging attack on the British tabloid media. Now, at the centre of this legal case is a letter written by the Duchess to her estranged father Thomas at his home in Mexico, portions of which were quoted in the Mail on Sunday earlier this year. In his statement, the Duke says that his wife has become one of the latest victims of the British tabloid media. He refers to a ruthless campaign that's escalated over the past year. He talks about the double standards of this specific press pack, which has vilified her almost daily for the past 9 months. He says that this amounts to bullying. And then he says this: "My greatest fear is of history repeating itself. I have seen what happens when someone I love is commoditized to the point where they are no longer treated or seen as a real person. I lost my mother, and now I watch my wife falling victim to the same powerful forces." Now, I understand that both the Queen and the Prince of Wales have been informed of this legal action. Both the Duke and Duchess clearly feel very strongly about this. They feel that they have no option now but to take one of the country's most powerful newspaper groups to court. In a statement a short time ago, the Mail on Sunday has said that it stands by its story and that it will be defending this case vigorously.
And that's Nicholas Witchell on tour with the Royals in South Africa. Just had a statement in from Campus Living Villages. They, of course, run Sonoda, where this young man was discovered dead. Who may have been lying there for several weeks, on the announcement of the former High Court Judge Kit Toogood, who's going to head the investigation for Canterbury University. Sonoda also says that over the past week we have been undertaking checks on all students in our accommodation to ensure they are all okay. In addition to that, we've made available professional counsellors to students, RAs, those are the resident assistants and staff. And they say they have deployed extra staff to support our existing team along with extra security at night. Let's get now to some of your feedback, and we're having a lot of it here, on the statement of regret from the UK High Commissioner. She delivered that in Gisborne today to iwi there. This person says, the apology was the stupidest, most PC rubbish I've heard in a while. Have the Northern tribes apologised for their frequent massacres of South Island and Southern Māori, or is that somehow different? To feel pain for those deaths 250 years later is disingenuous, this person says. Another, though, says expressing regret is a classic diplomatic weasel word, which cleverly means not making an apology or accepting ownership. An apology would be in order. Richard's got in contact to say atrocities, that's rewriting history. Cook's men were acting in self-defence. It's not an atrocity, it was a regrettable and sad act, but the young Englishmen thought they were acting in legitimate self-defence. Atrocity, Richard says, is an emotive and inaccurate word. Someone else says the statement and actions of the British High Commissioner in Turanganui-a-Kiwa are entirely appropriate and very welcome on this monumentous day. It was a wonderful testament to how far and how mature Aotearoa New Zealand has come in relations with Māori. That from Russell Armitage, who signs off by saying fifth generation Kiwi and descendant of Reverend John Hobbs, Methodist missionary in Hokianga and interpreter at the second signing of the treaty at that place. Someone else, though, disagrees entirely. More after the news.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leātawa tēnei. The British High Commissioner has offered her sympathy to descendants of those killed in the first encounter with James Cook 250 years ago. In two separate ceremonies today, Laura Clark has made expressions of regret to both the Ngati One Hapu and Gisborne iwi, whose ancestors were killed by the crew of the Endeavour within hours of their arrival. In the first event on Titirangi Mountain, where a statue of the first person to be killed in the encounter, Te Maro, stands, Laura Clark addressed the crowd. She expressed her sympathy and regret for what happened.
It is deeply sad that the first encounter happened in the way that it did. And to you, as the descendants of those killed, I offer my every sympathy. For I understand that the pain does not diminish with time.
The British High Commissioner, Laura Clark. More than 15,000 people have signed a petition to oppose a planned housing development next to the Whenuapai Air Base in Auckland. The developer Neil Group won a noise complaint case against the base in the Environment Court and rejects claims from the Defence Minister Ron Mark that the ruling may impact on the military's use of the area. The chair of the local board, Margaret Miles, says residents in the area know the base is noisy and it's never been a problem.
They have bought the land. I understand they bought it back in 2013. And basically at that time, I'm sure they would have been well aware of the airbase being there. So it sort of seems a little bit odd that they would now turn around and start complaining about the noise.
The Neil Group says it does not want to prevent airbase activities, and the ruling was to clarify an uncertainty about noise for council rezoning of the land. Engineering New Zealand has welcomed a decision which has cleared the way for a disciplinary investigation into the engineer who designed Christchurch's CTV building. The building collapsed in the 2011 Christchurch earthquake, killing 115 people. Its designer, Alan Ray, appealed the decision that allowed Engineering New Zealand to investigate his supervision of the building's design. Chief Executive Susan Freeman-Green says it will now continue the complaints process against Dr. Ray. She says it's important that the process is fair, robust and transparent. The investigation into the complaint is currently at an investigating committee stage. Susan Freeman-Green says the role of the committee is to determine whether there is a matter to answer. The National Foundation for Deaf and Hard of Hearing is blaming phones and earbuds for high rates of hearing loss among teenagers. It says screening of nearly 500 Year 9 students found a third had mild to severe hearing loss. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
The foundation says its work with 3 secondary schools found many young people are listening to music on their phones at high volumes and for long periods of time. It says that's bad for their hearing and their parents need to step in and act. It also says the government should introduce screening tests for secondary school students to identify those with hearing problems. The foundation says the incidence of hearing loss among young people is rising internationally and New Zealand needs more information about what's happening here. Ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
Health authorities say there are new cases of measles in parts of Otago and say they have spread outside of Queenstown. Previously, the Southern District Health Board has only recorded cases of the infectious disease in Queenstown. The Southern DHB's Medical Officer of Health, Dr Susan Jack, says there are now 57 cases in the district, 52 of them in Queenstown, 2 in Wanaka, 2 in Dunedin and 1 in Oamaru. Dr Jack says some people have also been asked to stay in self-isolation. She says most of the infected people are uncertain about their vaccination.
So some of them are unvaccinated, but we do have some that have had at least one vaccine and a few that have actually been fully vaccinated.
Southern DHB Medical Officer of Health, Dr Susan Jack. An Upper Hutt man is disgusted that dozens of fish have died because the Greater Wellington Regional Council flushed heavy sediment from a dam into a creek. Residents came across dozens of dead trout who were smothered in the creek below the Birchville Dam. Upper Hutt resident Ewan Green says was one of the first to take a look.
Me and my old man went up there, I grabbed my waders and dropped in at the first waterfall, and the sediment's like 200 mils, 300 mils thick, and there's dead trout. And so I walked up with a fishing net and just, kept finding no sign of life, no insects, no eels, no freshwater crays, and just kept pulling out dead fish every 100 odd metres.
Ewan Green says the creek is normally teeming with life and he wants to know how this all was allowed to happen. The Regional Council says it will visit the dam tomorrow to establish what happened. It's 6:05. The haves and have-nots of World Rugby collide again at the World Cup tonight with the 3-time champions, the All Blacks, playing Canada amid predictions the score will be a blowout. The bulk of the Canadian side are amateurs balancing playing with their jobs. They suffered at the hands of Italy in their tournament opener 48-7. Captain Tyler Ardron, who's one of the few professionals in the side and plays for the Chiefs, is urging his players to use the match to show their skills on the world stage.
For a lot of guys, this is a shop window, and hopefully some of them can put a hell of a performance out there and get themselves a contract, and that would be a win for us. Captain
Tyler Ardron. The match kicks off at 11:15. Meanwhile, the former Canterbury coach Rob Penny has been confirmed as the new coach of the New South Wales Waratahs Super Rugby side. He replaces fellow New Zealander Daryl Gibson, who resigned in June after overseeing a disappointing 2019 campaign. Penny has been coaching in Japan for the past 5 years. The New Zealand under-23 men's football team is just one step away from reaching the Tokyo Olympics after making the final of the qualifying tournament in Fiji. New Zealand has beaten Fiji 6-1 in the semi-finals and will play Vanuatu or Solomon Islands in the final on Saturday for a place in Tokyo. The National Rugby League's Dally M Awards are tonight, with Warriors captain Roger Tuivasa-Sheck in the running to win the Player of the Year award for the second straight season. Tuivasa-Sheck is a finalist for the Fullback of the Year, but Roosters number 1 James Tedesco was the favourite to win the positional prize and the Supreme Daily M Award. That's the news. Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel Peninsula. Showers frequent for a time tonight with thunderstorms and hail, possibly south of Waikato. Southwesterlies, gale in exposed places for a time tonight also. For the remainder of the North Island, showers spreading northwards tonight with isolated thunderstorms and hail, snow lowering to 700 metres. Becoming fine tonight or tomorrow. tomorrow. Southwesterly gales in exposed places. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, a period of rain. Possible thunderstorms tonight with snow to 600 metres. Fine tomorrow with morning frosts, apart from morning showers about Banks Peninsula. For Bulla and Westland, remaining showers north of Hokitika, clearing tonight, then fine everywhere. Morning frosts tomorrow. Fiordland, Otago and Southland, occasional showers, clearing about central and north Otago. Chatham Islands, fine tonight, showers tomorrow. RNZ National, it's coming up to 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. At an emotional gathering, the British government has today expressed regret to a Gisborne iwi whose ancestor, Te Maro, was shot dead by Captain Cook. The British High Commissioner, Laura Clark, delivered the official statement at the statue of Ngāti Oneone's Te Maro on Titirangi Kaiti Hill. The iwi says it's where Te Maro lived and managed gardens that fed 5 marae, and it was more appropriate to gather there than the landing site where he was killed. I asked Nick Tupara from Ngāti Oneone what the British High Commissioner said.
She gave an expression of regret. They talked about how she appreciated the impact that the actions of Cook and his crew had on our people and how enduring those impacts were on our people. And she talked about the I guess in a roundabout way, the fortitude of our folk to have gotten to where we are today. And, she hoped that would mean a stronger understanding and connectiveness to herself and particularly to the wider people of Great Britain.
What was that like, that moment?
Well, I've got to say it was quite emotional, to be frank, and because we've spent so much of our lives, and we certainly remembered our parents spending lives in a town that has been a Cook town up to now, and it's very hard for us to talk about our ancestors who also stood on the beach that day in 1769 and feel safe to tell their stories, and now I think the momentum has shifted, and her statement is part of us shifting as a whole community to be open to share our stories and to feel some pride in all the cultures that decide to make Tūranganui Gisborne their home.
When she spoke, who was she delivering the message for? Was it the British government? Did she mention the Queen?
She did. She was very clear that she represented the nations of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and specifically not the Queen, nor our Crown, and that she only spoke for her people, her country. And I've got to say, it made me think about who wasn't present today as well. When there was discussion about an apology around these events, it was, well, the discussions soon found some folk moving away from that sort of talk, and it became quite apparent that there were others that perhaps should have been there, or could have been there to offer positions as well. But she had decided to, I'll do it. I'll come in and make that connection with Ngāti Oneone people.
So who ran in the opposite direction, Nick? Who should have been there, who maybe wasn't?
Well, I think the Endeavour was here under the command of folk. They were here to undertake a duty of particular folk. And at this point in time, those folk have decided not to engage. And that's fine, because we live in hope that we will be able to have discussions with them. And I'm talking about the Royal Society of London, of England, the Admiralty, whose tasks Cook was performing on behalf of. And but I see that by the High Commissioner deciding to do it in a roundabout way, she is an appropriate person to encompass that. But it would have been nice to have some connection with some of these other bodies as well.
Was there a distinction made between an apology and what she was saying to you?
I didn't feel that it was anywhere like an apology. I felt that it was a heartfelt opportunity to begin a discussion together. I felt like we had sat down and we were having a chat about these things. I didn't feel that an apology would have been even appropriate in that circumstance. But I thought her statement was open-ended to a degree that I felt comfortable that this is the beginning of a longer-term relationship. And for me, that on reflection and discussion here now with you, indicates to me that there is an openness to continue to build a relationship together. And that's probably for Ngātarongi bigger than an apology could be.
So did she specifically list things that they were regretful about? Did she mention...
Yes.
What did she mention?
Yes, specifically the loss of life. She regretted the nature of the first engagement, the first encounter. She acknowledged the violence that occurred, and it was with regret that our ancestor Te Maro should be harmed during that engagement. And I think she acknowledged also that that's sat with Ngātarongi people for 250 years. And she also acknowledged that it's not something one can readily just set aside.
And that was Nick Tupara of Ngāti Oneone. A woman who bills herself as a psychic surgeon says attempts to shut down her shows are unfair, and she has helped heal people with many illnesses, including Parkinson's and brain tumours. The New Zealand Skeptics Group has emailed all the venues booked for Jeanette Wilson's tour in a bid to get the shows shut down. The group says the tour is dangerous because Ms Wilson, a former bank manager turned psychic, claims to heal sick people by working with God and talking with spirit surgeons. Jeanette Wilson says at least 10 people suffering from various ailments are healed during every show. I asked her how she knows they're healed.
Because all of a sudden they can move a leg that was paralysed, or they can see out of an eye they couldn't see out of, or their breathing improves and they can walk a long distance and they couldn't, or they're out of their wheelchair. It is that dramatic.
So have you healed someone who's paralysed?
Yes. And I filmed that was in Croydon probably 2 months ago. That lady's name's Hazel. She had MS, paralysed right side, came in a wheelchair, was able to walk around and stood for most of the evening, having recovered the use of her leg.
And have you checked back? Is she still healed?
She's still healed. She's continuing to make progress.
Okay, so is it just sort of orthopaedic things? I've seen some of the videos. Is it just knees and hips and ankles, or do you do cancers or tumours?
Yeah, I've worked on people with brain tumours, cancers. I've worked on people with things like fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, you name it. I've worked on most conditions. Occasionally I will find a person I can't help, but usually I'm able to help them. It sometimes takes more than one session, particularly with something that's terminal. And I may be given guidance as to some protocol they need to follow. But usually it might be a food, it would be something very, very natural. And I never, ever tell them not to see a doctor, not to follow what doctors say. I work complementary to doctors. It's not alternative, it's definitely complementary what I do.
So I'm understanding this properly. Through whatever spirits work through you have cured cancer as well?
Yes, I can say that. Yes, I've got clients that I could provide testimonies that has happened. But I've also seen people with cancer where the healing has not helped them. Everybody is different.
But you say that there have been instances where you've cured cancers or tumours?
Yeah, absolutely.
What do oncologists say about your work?
No oncologist has ever come to see me, and that's really, really surprising because I would have thought they know the results that I've got, but nobody comes to see me, and I find that really, really surprising. If I was a doctor, an oncologist, I know there's an oncologist on the Gold Coast, a lady who had got brain tumours, came to see me, saw me once, all the tumours went. I know when she went back to see him 3 years later, he broke down in tears. But he wrote a report on me, apparently, but without talking to me, without interviewing me. So I've been doing this for 25 years, and it actually surprises me that the medical profession do not want to know what I'm doing.
I suppose one of the issues that is being raised in relation to a tour of yours that is coming up is when you're making claims, like with medicines or any other medical treatments, if you're making claims about therapeutic benefits or cures, they need to be supported by evidence. Have you got scientific evidence that it's what you're doing that has resulted in a healing or a cure?
I don't make any scientific medical claims for what I do. I say, come and see, bring me your sore backs, your sore knees, whatever conditions you've got, let's see what happens for you. I never can say I can cure a condition because I don't know. Everybody's different. You asked me if I've cured people of cancer. I don't do the curing, God does. But I have had clients that have got remarkably better, and there is no explanation for it other than the healing intervention.
Yes, but your website says that you have healed people and you offer healing. So whether it's through you as the conduit, you're advertising a service which suggests people can be cured of medical conditions through this psychic surgery. That's a fair representation of what you're saying, isn't it?
It is a fair representation of what I'm saying, but I never ever use the word cured because that doesn't fit my framework of beliefs.
But healing is virtually the same word, and it suggests when you say you've healed people, it's interchangeable. If you've healed them, you've taken away what ails them. And you've told me that you have healed people of cancer.
I have witnessed people being healed of cancer by God. I personally don't use that word cured. That's a word that you've introduced into this conversation.
You've healed them.
I don't use that word. It doesn't fit. I've witnessed them being healed, and there's testimonies of those people. Now, I don't go out rah with my advertising to say, oh, look, I've healed cancer. That would be totally irresponsible. Mostly at my shows, I'm working on things like sore backs, sore knees, sore hips, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, breathing problems, you name it. I'm working on all manner of different things. People come along to see a show to see what is possible. But I film every single healing. And you know what? In 25 years, I've not had a single complaint. But what is happening here in New Zealand, and it's only happened in the last 2 days, one man that belongs to some skeptic society that is supposed to be a charity. Well, I've got a question that a skeptic society would be a charity.
You're sceptical about that, are you, Jeanette?
I am. If he was truly sceptical, he'd be enlightened. He's not closed-minded. He's not met me. He's not been to a show. He's not got a complaint from one of my clients. I've been in New Zealand doing this for 25 years. Sorry, 20 years in New Zealand, 5 in the UK.
Given that you
I don't get complaints.
Given that you are using, spirits, or they're using you, whichever way you want to look at it, that there is an involvement of a spirit.
I said that I'm working with God.
Working with God.
All healing comes from God.
Do you have to be a believer then if you turn up at your show to want to be healed?
That's why I'm not doing this at a show. I'm not doing the shows within churches because I don't want to bring belief systems into it. People can be sceptical. They can be atheists. It absolutely doesn't matter.
And you could still heal them? There's still a possibility you could heal them?
Yeah.
So how much does that cost?
I've got over 1,000 videos online. The healing is free.
The healing is free?
$40.
But you have to get in, don't you, to the venue? So
into the door, yeah.
Yep. So you pay how much to get in?
$40.
Yep.
$40. Yep. And but the healing itself is free, so nobody pays extra for the healing. Nobody's agreed in advance who I'm going to work on. There's over 1,000 videos online on my website, Facebook page, Jeanette Wilson Medium, that people can look at and they can see all manner of different complaints being alleviated and healed.
So if you pay $40 and go to the show, how do you get in the queue? How do you get in the queue to be healed? How do you choose the people
There's no
that you
queue.
hear?
There's no queue. No, there isn't a queue as such. Everybody's in an audience. It's a small audience. It's an intimate thing. And the first thing I will ask in the first half is who has got a condition that if it got better, the whole audience could see. I'm looking for things that will look particularly good on camera, but I'm also wanting to show the audience what is possible. So somebody might
What do you mean looking for things that would look good on camera?
Because we're living in a sceptical world, if somebody says, oh, I did have backache and now it's gone, who's going to believe that? I look for things that look good on camera in the first half. Yeah, in the second half, anybody can volunteer. But I'm causing a shift within the mind to show that these things are possible.
But some of the things...
Have you watched some of the videos?
I've watched a lot of your videos, actually. And
Right.
some of the things
Have you
like
seen the lady that got a vision back?
There was
Did you
knee...
see the one...
No, I've
with the
missed,
lady that
I've
got a
missed
vision
that
back?
one, but I can look it up.
Have you seen the lady with Parkinson's disease?
There was knee complaints and a number of back complaints and joint complaints. Those things are things that, well, they're undetectable to the eye, aren't they? So even if they were on camera, we don't know. Well, where's the proof?
Yeah, those ones are from the second half of the show, which is exactly my point, which is why in the first half of the show, I asked for the things that are visible for the camera. So I got a lady from Barnsley that had Parkinson's disease and a particular kind of dystonia, which means she jerks her body. She can't stop. She's had it for 12 years. And in one session, that has gone for that woman, and that has changed her life. Now, there may be other people out there with that condition that have lost all hope of ever getting a cure because the medical profession cannot help them. I am giving people hope.
And that self-proclaimed psychic surgeon, Jeanette Wilson. It is 24 minutes after 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. More than 15,000 people have signed a petition opposing a planned housing development next to the Whenuapai Air Base in Auckland, saying a court ruling may have jeopardised the military's use of the land. Neil Construction went to the Environment Court to see if limits on engine testing noises applied to the base, but says it didn't want to limit Defence Force activities. But the Defence Minister, Ron Mark, says that's exactly what may now happen, and some angry residents say it's a ploy to bump up the value of the property. Jordan Bond reports.
A subsidiary of the private, mostly Malaysian-owned company Neil Construction is planning to build up to 300 houses bordering Whenuapai Air Base in West Auckland. The land, worth $31 million, is zoned future residential. It says there was legal uncertainty about what the noise limits were, and the Environment Court has simply ruled that the Defence Force's own limits do apply. That worries Ron Mark, who says it'll affect military operations. Locals who like the airbase say noise comes with the territory and are frustrated that a foreign-owned company has come in and potentially changed the special character of the area.
They have bought the land, and basically at that time, I'm sure they would have been well aware of the airbase being there. So it sort of seems a little bit odd that they would now turn around and start complaining about the noise.
That's the chair of the local board, Margaret Miles, who says everyone who's bought in the area knows the airbase makes noise and it's never been a problem. In fact, it's part of the attraction. She says it seems to be self-interest by the Neil Group and against the wishes of locals.
I think I've also heard that said that why would they do it other than to increase the value of their land? It just seems odd, and I would imagine that the land would have been purchased bearing in mind that the airbase is there and that they're right adjacent to it. I'm sure that would have been reflected in the value of the land at the time.
The Neil Group CEO Phil Ainsworth says he does not want to affect the airbase or stop its activities, and it certainly doesn't want it to close. He says the Environment Court ruling will now help Auckland Council finalise the zoning of the surrounding land. A petition, which now has more than 15,000 signatures, says it's a disgraceful hijacking of the law, so the developer can sell the houses for more money. One petitioner, Bridget Burgess, takes her kids to watch planes take off, and she doesn't want to see the airbase operations eroded.
I think it's a historical part of the area. Really cool things happen, like the Royals got landed there. People get proud of their community when big things happen like that in little places.
Ron Mark has sought legal advice, saying he wonders if property development is a threat to national security. He says it could also affect search and rescue operations. The Neil Group says it has never complained about noise at the base and says aircraft activity during emergencies is allowed at any time and would never be limited by the ruling. The Defence Force has 20 days to appeal. If it does, the ruling will not be enforced until a decision's reached. For Checkpoint, Jordan Bond.
Let's go to the US now, and the Bronx Zoo in New York says a woman who trespassed inside its lion enclosure on Sunday put herself in serious danger and could have died. Social media footage shows the woman dancing and waving her hands as if taunting the adult male lion to move from across a small moat inside the enclosure fence. Now, the zoo says it's filed a police complaint for criminal trespass after the incident, although wardens say they have no idea who the woman is, why she entered the enclosure, or how long she was in there. CNN's Lauren Johnson reports.
The unidentified woman, already on the inside of the lion enclosure fence, waves at the giant animal. Then, as the lion stands still, glaring at her, she dances, seemingly carefree, just feet away across a small moat. The video was taken by another visitor to the zoo Saturday. By today, onlookers at the exhibit had heard about the dangerous ordeal.
There was a woman who thought it was a good idea to go dancing with lions, and I'm wondering what the hell she was thinking.
Andrea Arndt's kids love lions, so she brought them by the exhibit, all the while wondering why the woman would do such a thing.
And what was your initial reaction?
That she was dumb. Why would you jump in with a wild animal?
Sophia Shiameta says she knows better.
I think it was kind of ridiculous that somebody would actually do that because they can die.
John Rubo heard the news while walking by with his 3 young sons.
It's just important to be conscious and smart about your actions when you're here. You have to be responsible.
He hopes the decisions of one woman won't ruin the experience for others.
At this exhibit, there's low walls, so you want to get close enough to see what's going on, but you don't want to have these high fences in front of all the exhibits. It takes the fun out of the zoo.
There is that moat, a narrow little river of water that separates the lion from the grassy area in front of the fence, which allows for a lower barrier for visitors to peer over. The Bronx Zoo did release a statement saying in part, quote, "Barriers and rules are in place to keep both visitors, staff, and animals safe. We have a zero-tolerance policy on trespass and violation of barriers." We're told the woman was escorted out of the park and the lion exhibit remains open.
And that was Lauren Johnson in New York. Before we go, just a quick bit of feedback on the gesture made in Gisborne today. This person says, if the British government's gesture satisfies the iwi's loss of mana, then the signal of regret is good. Generally, revisionist history is completely pointless. Events happen in the context of different times, values and behaviours, says that person. Thank you so much for all your feedback. We'll see you again tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Wellington Regional Council has given the green light to a 40-metre buffer zone at Queen Elizabeth Park, but wants the government to help meet the cost of coastal erosion. Health authorities are warning anyone who wasn't vaccinated for measles and who travelled on flights between Auckland and Tauranga last Thursday to look out for symptoms because of an infected passenger. And 10 people needed hospital treatment in Fiji today after the bus they were travelling in collided with a parked vehicle. Those are the headlines. We will have our next news and weather coming up at 7 o'clock on RNZ National.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
China's president, Xi Jinping, was standing on top of the famous Chairman Mao portrait. Missiles and tanks and gyrocopters and drones. And then for about another hour or so, you had a civilian parade backing it all up.
Live with local, national and international stories.